Guys, okay.
I'm jealous.
We're gonna start. Guys, on behalf of Stephen and myself, we're very grateful for Rabbi Weiner, who's accepted to speak on our behalf in memory of my brother and Stephen's mother. The showing tonight is a testament to the community and the friends that we have, and we're very grateful. For those who don't know Rabbi Weiner, he's incredibly brilliant, very humble, and we're particularly grateful that he's up here to represent us in what's a pretty special night for us. And may both Neshanos have an aliyah through the learning that will be going on tonight. After the Shiur, we'll be having a minyan from Marv, and then we'll walk across the street to the Heuman's home for a barbecue. So thank you again for everybody showing up, and I know you'll enjoy this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to again thank Steve and Ben for inviting me to speak. It's really a humbling honor to be able to speak Le'iloi Nishmas to such special people. I was unfortunately never blessed to know either of them, but the Tzad HaShaveh, the common denominator that emerged in hearing from Stephen and hearing from Ben about their beloved mother and brother respectively, Esther eidel, Avinoam. The Tzad HaShaveh that comes from between them is a ceaseless commitment to others, dedication of one's life for someone else. Right? Stephen describing to me how his mother lived for their family, lived for Klal Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, devoted her life to those with special needs, to widows, to widowers, things that many of us don't think of on a daily basis, things of just caring about those, as Rashi says so beautifully, the four people of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Those who are in need, dedicating her life to them. And similarly, Avinoam, the beautiful, beautiful tribute, the Sefer Torah dedication a while ago, of just how he also gave his life for others, for spreading Torah, going all the way to Australia, to be Makadish, Shemayim, Barabim. And our world is an empty place without the two of them. In Yurtzeit, that the learning that we do tonight, the brief learning, should bring a little bit of the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world that's been lost through their untimely passing. In Parshas Ve'eschanan, we are reacquainted with a very well-known portion of the Torah, and that is the Aseres Hadibros. As we know, the Aseres Hadibros take two this week, but with some very salient differences from what we saw in Parshas Yisrael. And one of the better-known differences comes in the fourth of the commandments, when the Torah describes the mitzvah of Shabbos. We know that in Parshas Yisrael, the first time we heard the Aseres Hadibros, we are told that Shabbos is Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshis, right? That it is a commemoration for the 6 days that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and rested on the seventh. And yet, in Parshas Ve'eschanan, we get a very, very different reason that the Torah says why it is that we observe Shabbos. The Torah tells us, V'zacharta ki eved hayisa b'eretz Mitzrayim. You should remember when you observe Shabbos that reminds you that you were a slave in Egypt, and Hashem removed you from Egypt, and therefore, is Yom HaShabbos. That's why you were commanded to do the Shabbos, because of the exodus from Egypt. So two very different reasons, which we're familiar with, right? Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim and Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshis. Tosfos has a fascinating comment in Maseches Pesachim and Kuf Yud Zayin, where he says that this connection between Shabbos and the Exodus, Shabbos and Yitzias Mitzrayim, is not just philosophical, it actually may have halachic ramifications as well. Tosfos quotes a fascinating medrash where he says, we know that there are 39 avos melachos on Shabbos, right? The very famous Mishnah on Shabbos and Daf Ayin Gimel, avos melachos arba'im chaser achas. There are 39 categories of labor that one is not allowed to do on Shabbos, right? Why aren't you allowed to drive on Shabbos? Because the combustion of the engine, it's like lighting a fire, right? You're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos. You're not allowed to build on Shabbos. You're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. 39 categories of labor. And the question is, where do those come from? How do we know what is allowed on Shabbos, what is not allowed on Shabbos? Why is it that you're not allowed to carry? Why is it that you're not allowed to light fires? Why is it you're not allowed to paint? So here we find several different possibilities. The classic explanation, the Gemara Masechet Shabbos on Daf Tes, Shabbos and Daf Vav, that it is based on the Mishkan, right? Whatever Bnei Yisrael had to do to build the Mishkan, that is what you are not allowed to do on Shabbos. Right? And there's a famous machlokas, Rashi and Rav Haigo on Masechet Shabbos. Are we talking about the building of the Mishkan, or even the running of the Mishkan, whatever they did for the Karbanos on a daily basis? Whatever it is, something related to the Mishkan, that is the source, right? They had to plant, you do not plant. They had to build, you do not build. Right? They had to lift beams, you do not lift beams. You're not allowed to carry. Everything that you can't do is based on what they could not do in the Mishkan. The Zohar in Parshas Pinchas gives a very different reason. It says the reason, the source for the 39 Avos Malachos on Shabbos is Brias Ha'olam, right? Whatever Hashem did in creating the world, that is what you're not allowed to do. So God built, right? He planted trees, so to speak. He did all of these constructive activities. That is what you have to refrain from on Shabbos. But Tosfos quotes the Medrash with a fascinating third possibility. From where do we get these 39 categories of malacha, of labor, that one is not allowed to do on Shabbos? He says it's based on Zecher Litzias Mitzrayim. It's whatever the Jews had to do in Egypt for Paro. That is what you are not allowed to do on Shabbos. A fascinating idea, right? They had to build the pyramids. You're not allowed to build, right? They had to go fishing for Paro. You're not allowed to go fishing. You're not allowed to go hunting. Everything that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos is what the Jews had to do from Shabbos. It's a fascinating extension of this principle of Zecher Litzias Mitzrayim. Literally, that is what forms the basis for everything that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, according to one opinion. Again, the typical answer, the classic approach, is that it's based on the Mishkan. That's what the Gemara seems to say. But there is such a medrash that maybe it's based on what we had to do in Mitzrayim. But there's perhaps an even more relevant application of this idea that the Torah compares Shabbos to Yetzias Mitzrayim that applies to each and every single one of us every Friday night of our lives. The exception maybe of when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos. And that is fascinating Gemara, and that same sugi, which Tosfos was commenting on, Psachim and Kuf Yadzayin, where the Gemara quotes from Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, V'chayav lahazkir Yetzias Mitzrayim b'kiddush hayom. There is a halacha, the Gemara says, no one argues on this halacha. It's brought categorically that when one says Kiddush, you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. How do we know this? The Gemara brings a Gezerah Shava, right? We know when the Torah uses the same word or a similar word in two different contexts, you can learn one halacha from the other. And we know when it comes to Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Torah tells us, L'man tizkor es yom tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha, tizkor, remember. And we know when it comes to Shabbos, the Torah says, Zachor es yom ha-Shabbos l'kadsho. Tizkor and Zachor is a similar enough comparison, the Gemara says, that we learn that one has to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in order to fulfill the obligation of Kiddush. And this is the source, for those who didn't know, why every Friday night, when you say Zecher Litzias Mitzrayim Kivanu Vacha, that Zecher Litzias Mitzrayim, you're fulfilling that line of the Gemara. That's why they put it in there. Because it sounds from the Gemara, you are not Yotzei the mitzvah of Kiddush if you do not make some reference to the Exodus. If this is the case, the Minchas Chinuch has a fascinating question, a famous question in Mitzvah Lamed Aleph, which sort of opens up a whole can of worms that many people have a difficulty with. And that is the following. We know, as we alluded to earlier, there's a mitzvah of Kiddush, right? Everybody agrees. One has to make Kiddush on Friday night. Kiddush on Shabbos morning, that's something else. That's a later rabbinic enactment. But Kiddush on Friday night, everybody agrees is a Torah obligation, no less important than shaking a lulav, no less important than hearing the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, is making Kiddush on Friday night. What exactly fulfills the mitzvah of Kiddush? See, most people, if they hear about Kiddush, they'll be thinking, the first image that comes to mind is right, a cup of grape juice, right? You think of a cup of grape juice, a cup of wine. But the truth is, according to the vast majority of opinions, you do not have to have grape juice, wine, or anything to fulfill the mitzvah de'oraisa of Kiddush. The Torah obligation does not require you to hold anything in your hand. According to the Torah obligation, it is zachreu b'devarim. You just have to say something about today is Shabbos. You have to acknowledge Shabbos is now. You have to maybe make some sort of blessing about Shabbos. There are different opinions in the Rishonim. Nothing about Kiddush, about wine. The concept of wine, the Gemara says in Psachim and Daf Kuf Vav, the Rishonim there elaborate, is a later rabbinic enactment. The rabbis felt, we don't need to just take a bencher and say Kiddush. It's nice to do it al hakos. You give more honor to the blessing if you do it on a cup of wine. If you don't have wine, you can make it on challah, according to most opinions. But the original mitzvah d'oraisa, let's say you're stranded somewhere and you don't have any wine, you don't have any challah, can you still make Kiddush? Yeah, you can make Kiddush. You take out your bencher and you can say, you don't say Borei Pri Hagafen, but you can still fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush min haTorah, the basic obligation, even without wine. Is that clear to everybody? And there is a famous sheet of Rashi. It's not really Rashi, but it looks like Rashi, Maseches Nazir and Daf Gimel, who seems to say that it's d'oraisa on wine. There's one day of Tosfos and Psachim and Daf Vav that Kiddush on wine is d'oraisa. The vast majority of opinions assume this is only midirabbanan. And therefore, the poskim debate, how does one fulfill the basic mitzvah of Kiddush? And the Magen Avraham in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph is a very famous Kiddush, where he says you fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush min haTorah by simply davening the Friday night Shmon Esrei. When you go to shul and you daven the Shmon Esrei, what do you say in your Shmon Esrei? You say Mekadesh HaShabbos, right? You make the bracha on Shabbos. That is Kiddush, according to him. You just fulfilled the mitzvah min haTorah. Okay, you should go home and do it on a cup of wine to do the optimal mitzvah, to do it even the way the rabbis embellish the mitzvah, the enhancement of the mitzvah. But in its core essence, you have just fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush min haTorah. Rabbi Akiva Eiger in that siman goes even a step further. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, by simply saying good Shabbos to someone, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush min haTorah. An unbelievable Kiddush, because what have you done? You've acknowledged that today is Shabbos. That's all that God insists that you do on Shabbos. Doing it with a fancy nusach on a cup of wine, that's the cherry on top. That's the din d'Rabbanan. But mid'oraisa, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, maybe even just saying good Shabbos to someone fulfills the mitzvah. That's why there are some poskim who say that if you're in Israel and you see someone on the street, it's always a good idea to say good Shabbos to them, because odds are they're Jewish, and if they respond to you good Shabbos, you have helped them fulfill a mitzvah mid'oraisa. They have just fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush by acknowledging today is Shabbos. Fascinating idea. And most poskim seem to agree with this Magen Avraham, that at the very least when you daven Shmon Esrei, you are fulfilling the mitzvah of Kiddush. If this is the case, however, the Minchas Chinuch there asks the obvious question, do we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in our Shmon Esrei on Friday night? How can we say that you fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush min haTorah by just davening Shmon Esrei in shul? You've done. Okay, you go home, you'll do the rabbinic mitzvah as well. We just said in the Gemara that an essential component of Kiddush is you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Man tizkor es yimtzeischa meretz Mitzrayim kol yimei chayecha. It's a very, very strong question. And if you've ever learned the Minchas Chinuch, you get the sense that there are certain things that he says that are possibilities. Right? He's a very creative thinker, and he says maybe this could be. And there are other times where he puts his money down, and he's very confident. And in this Kiddush, you get the sense he is very confident. He says there's no way anyone could fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush by just davening, because in our Shmon Esrei, we do not mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. And similarly, he would argue, there's no way you could just say good Shabbos to someone, and that fulfills the mitzvah of Kiddush. You have to say, good Shabbos, Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right? He says there has to be some mention of the Exodus to fulfill Kiddush. How could it be, he asks, that the poskim hold that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush even without mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim? It's a pretty strong question. So perhaps we could give a few different possibilities. One possibility could be, maybe in Achinai, maybe he's right. Maybe in davening, we should be mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right? If you look at the Rashbam in that Gemara, a very cryptic Rashbam, he seems to say that in his Shmon Esrei, they actually mention Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. They added in those words. And there are some nuschalos of davening that have that in there. Maybe that would be one possibility. Our minhag is generally not that way, right? We do not mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in the Shmon Esrei on Friday night. But that could be one simple solution. The Be'er Halacha, however, the Chafetz Chaim, has a fascinating suggestion as well. And this is in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph. But the Be'er Halacha says, how could it be that you would fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush min haTorah, davening Shmon Esrei? Didn't we say that to fulfill Kiddush, you have to say some mention about the Exodus? And in our Shmon Esrei, we do not mention the Exodus. So there's a very sharp suggestion. He says, you're right that in our Shmon Esrei, we don't mention the Exodus. But yeah, exactly. Just a couple seconds earlier, we did mention the Exodus. Right? When did we mention the Exodus in Mariv? In Shema, right? Shema, right after Shema, we Ga'al Yisrael, right? We have references to the Exodus. So he says maybe you don't have to have it literally in the davening. Maybe as long as it's juxtaposed, it's close enough, we'll give you credit for having mentioned the exodus. And now you mention Shabbos, 1 + 1 = 2. You end up getting your kiddush out of that. A very creative suggestion. I thought that maybe this suggestion might relate, not mukhrach, but maybe it could connect to a very well-known machlokus regarding smichas geula litfilah. We know that in general, the Gemara tells us in Brachos and Daf Daled, there's a very important idea in Shacharis and in Mariv to say Shema and the bracha after Shema and go right into Shmon Esrei, right? That's what we call being somech geula litfilah. And it's very, very important. The Gemara has all sorts of praiseworthy things there to say about someone who does this. But there's a big discussion in the poskim, the Shagas Aryeh and Siman Tez Zayin, there's a whole piece on this, the Beis Yosef talks about it. Do you have to do that? Does that principle apply on Shabbos? Is there any halacha that on Shabbos you have to go straight from Shema Ga'al Yisrael into the Shmon Esrei or not? Big discussion in the poskim, but that may relate a little bit to this question, right? If you assume that halachically Shema on Shabbos has to be linked to the Shmon Esrei, then maybe it makes more sense to argue that you could say Yetzias Mitzrayim in Shabbos, in Shema, and you can mention Shabbos in the Shmon Esrei, and they're linked, they can combine. But if you hold that on Shabbos, there's no connection. Shabbos is one unit of davening. Shmon Esrei is a separate unit of davening, and you don't have to halachically link them. Maybe one could argue that this chiddush of the Be'er Halacha is a little bit more difficult to understand, that the mentioning of Egypt beforehand would account for the mentioning of Shabbos later. And one final possibility to this conundrum again, of how could it be that the poskim hold your Yurtzeit, the mitzvah of Kiddush min HaTorah, by davening the Shmon Esrei, where you mention Shabbos on Friday night, but there's no mention of the Exodus? Maybe we could challenge the very assumption of the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch assumes that when the Gemara learns from a Gzeira Shava, right, it says one word over here and one word over there, the Minchas Chinuch writes, that is considered as if it's actually written in the Chumash. That's a din da'oraisa. That's like the Torah itself is telling you, you have to mention the Exodus in your Kiddush. Maybe it's not so simple. Is it so obvious that a Gezeira Shav, if something is not written explicitly in the Chumash, rather it's derived exegetically, that has the status of a din da'oraisa, that's the same thing. The Torah says, don't murder. That's explicit in the Torah. Something that we learn more wraparound from the Gezeira Shav, that also would be on the same level of don't murder, keep the Shabbos, etc. Maybe it's not so simple, right? There's a fascinating comment of Rashi and Gittin on Daf Lamed Gimel. We don't have time to get into all the details of it, where he suggests, he rejects this, but it is such an opinion he brings from his rabbis, that maybe a Gezeira Shava is only D'Rabbanan. Maybe that doesn't have the same weight of a biblical commandment. Something that's written explicitly black and white in the Torah, that is the highest level of commandment. If God concealed it in some way, he just hinted at the law by putting this word over here and this word over here, maybe that's not a din da'oraisa, right? Rashi quotes an unbelievable possibility that maybe kiddushay kesef, right, getting married through money, as opposed to the other two ways of shtar or bia, giving a document or intimate relations. Maybe that method is only d'Rabbanan, because that's learned through a Gezeira Shava. And the Rambam, believe it or not, seems to say something like that as well at the beginning of Hilchos Yishus. But in any event, without getting into all the intricacies of it, suffice it to say that maybe not everyone agrees that just because something is learned from a Gezeira Shava, it has the bona fide status of a card-carrying din da'oraisa. And if that's the case, again, we can answer our question. That mid'oraisa, the Torah obligation, is mention the Exodus, mention Shabbos on Friday night. The rabbis added on, do it over a cup of wine, and they also added on, mention the Exodus. But maybe even without a cup of wine, even without mentioning the Exodus, you have still fulfilled some baseline obligations. So just to review very briefly, we saw three different possible explanations for the question of the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch asked, the Gemara has a halacha that in order to fulfill the basic mitzvah of Kiddush, you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. If that's the case, in our Shmon Esrei on Friday night, we do not mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, and yet many authorities seem to hold that our Shmon Esrei on Friday night counts as Kiddush. You fulfill the basic mitzvah. How could that be? So we said maybe we should be mentioning the Exodus in our Shmon Esrei, which we do not do. Maybe the mention of the Exodus a few seconds before, around the time of the Shema, fulfilled that obligation of mentioning the Exodus. And a third possibility, maybe this whole concept of mentioning the Exodus and the Kiddush is also more on a weaker level. It's not a full-blown din d'oraisa to the point that at least, even if without mentioning the Exodus, you have accomplished something. I would just mention that this discussion of Shabbos being Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, perhaps one has to take a brief step back and ask a broader question, and that is, what exactly is the connection between Shabbos and the Exodus? Why is it that the halacha makes such a big emphasis that every Friday night we insist that you not only mention it's Shabbos now, but I remember the Exodus at this moment? So the Rambam writes an interesting idea. The Rambam writes a slave cannot take a vacation. The Rambam writes in the Morah HaNevuchim, right? If you're a slave, you can't take a day off, right? And this is a very important mussar, right? If you work so hard, you're so much of a worker that at 6 o'clock on Friday afternoon you can't put your pen down, on some level you're a slave, right? You are not a free person. The affirmation of your freedom is being able to take a day off. Or the Ramban writes a different explanation in this week's parsha. The Ramban writes that both Shabbos and Yetzias Mitzrayim represent the concept of God's unending intervention in the laws of nature. Right? Just as God created the world and He rested, so to Yetzias Mitzrayim evidenced God's intimate intervention into man's activities, into the workings of the world. But perhaps one could suggest another possibility as well. And this is based more on mystical ideas, which I think are actually very relevant Bizman Hazeh as well. And that is similar to the Rambam, the notion that Shabbos represents your freedom, right? You are free from something. But not just like the Rambam said, you're free from your boss, you're free from the taskmaster in Egypt, you're also free internally. It represents an internal sense of freedom as well. You see, a person can be enslaved to a physical taskmaster, right? Someone else can have physical control over you, but it's also possible internally to have something else controlling you, right? Living in time, right? Being human beings who are subject to a present, a past, a future, it's very, very easy to constantly have your mind thinking of some other time of where you are, right? If you're with your family, for example, and you're so worried about the presentation you have to give tomorrow at work that you can't focus on where you are right now, on some level, that event has mastery over you, right? It has removed you from your life, from your current existence, and it is taking you to another time, some distant point in the future, right? If at work, all you can do is think about your vacation coming up, right? During the weekdays, all you think about, what day is it till I get to the weekend? You're always looking to some other time. On some level, that has dominance over you. You are not free to enjoy where you are. If your Sundays are ruined because you're just thinking of, tomorrow I have to go back to work, tomorrow I have to go back to work, your mind is always somewhere else. That itself is a form of avdus. It's sort of an internal avdus to life's circumstances. And if you look at the halachos of Shabbos, if you take a step back and sort of like the quarterback, see the whole field, there's one theme that constantly comes across that all the halachos are all about engendering. And that is a state of mind of being completely present in the moment, of being completely absorbed in whatever it is that you're doing. Right? We know on Friday night, we come home, we make Kiddush and we cover the challahs. Right? Why do we cover the challahs? So we know the Torah quotes 3 different reasons in some Reish Ayin Aleph. The famous reason is bosh to the pas, right? We don't want to embarrass the challah, right? Because really you should be making the bracha on the challah before you make the bracha on the wine, and yet we v'nahafochu, we switch the order. Why do we switch the order? Right? Ever think about that? Why does wine come before challah on Friday night? So it's explained that challah represents, bread is something that you eat to hold you over for later, right? You're going on a day trip, have a sandwich in the morning, it gives you energy for later, so you can go out and do things. It fills you up. Wine is the exact opposite. Wine, the Gemara says in Psachim and Daf Kov Zayin, chamra garir. The more wine you drink, believe it or not, makes you hungrier. Wine has no filling value at all. It's about purely enjoying the moment, the l'chaim that you're having at this second. And it is explained that the reason why you have wine before challah on Shabbos is because that is the theme of what Shabbos is all about. The wine over the challah. It's about enjoying, where am I at this very second? Don't think about what's coming up later on. Right? There's a fascinating halacha. Many people don't know this. Like Gemara in Brachos and Daf Vav, that on Shabbos you're not allowed to run. A lot of people don't know this. I'm not talking about running for fitness. It's like you're late for something, you're not allowed to run. You have to walk, and ideally you're supposed to walk even slower than you walk during the week. The Gemara gives one exception. If you're late for a shul, the Gemara says you're allowed to run. But other than that, the Gemara says you're not allowed to run. Why not? So it's not just, many people think it's because of exertion. There are a lot of things on Shabbos that exert you that are not necessarily other. You can go for a very long walk in the burning heat, and there's no technical eliezer of that on Shabbos. The reason you're not allowed to run, it's explained, is because when you're running, you're saying that the place I have to get to is more important than where I am right now, right? That's the essence of my running. I'm late, I got to get there. You're not focusing on where you are. You're purely focused on this destination, on where you're headed to. And that's antithetical to the entire concept of Shabbos. Shabbos is saying, where do you have to run to? Where are you late? You are where you need to be. That's the essence of Shabbos. What the Torah says, Al Yetze Ish Mimkomo B'Yom HaShabbos. Don't leave where you are. Focus on every step that you're taking, every conversation you're having, the precious moments you have with your family. That's what Shabbos is all about, enjoying that. Put everything else out of your mind. As Rashi quotes the Medrash, Kilu kol malachtecha hasuya. It's like there's nothing left to do on Shabbos. You just be. Right? This is the reason for the very well-known halacha of hachana. You're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos for after Shabbos. A lot of people think the rabbis take away all the fun on Shabbos. I need to get ready for my trip on Motzei Shabbos. It's exactly the opposite. The rabbis are setting you free by prohibiting you from running, from thinking about after Shabbos, forcing you. And in our day and age, this is one of the hardest things to do. We probably more than any generation in history struggle with this, of shutting off your phone, enjoying where you are, not being a slave to something else in the future that is removing you from what's in front of you right now. Many, we could talk at length of so many different halachas and Shabbos are about this point of constantly reminding you. Why is it that the sages said you're not allowed to make bakashos on Shabbos, right? The Gemara says, brachos on Chafal, you're not supposed to ask for things on Shabbos. Because again, when you ask for something that you don't have, you're thinking about something else, an eventuality, not focusing on where you are right now, what you have. And so that, I think, is really the essence of Shabbos, and that perhaps on another level, maybe the secret of what Zecher Litzias Mitzrayim is about. There's no greater freedom in life, right? You could have all the money in the world, you could be on the best vacation in the world, but if your mind can't stay where it is, if your mind is meshubad to some other worry, to something else, it doesn't matter if you're in Hawaii, you're not free. But if you're able to internalize that message of Shabbos, and Yitzias Mitzrayim, you're completely here, that is the ultimate chayus. That's what Shabbos is, that's what the wine is before the challah, the essence of enjoying where you are. And so Yurtzeit, as we celebrate the lives over the next 25 hours, there's two very special people who we lost, and who unfortunately both of them at such young ages. I think if there's one thing we can take from that, it's the value of this message of Shabbos, of appreciating every second that we have on this earth. We don't know how long Hashem is going to give us to live on this earth, but we have the ability to celebrate whatever He does give us. And Yurtzeit that through our own actions and celebrating their lives will bring much nachas to them in everything that we do. In Yurtzeit we should only be able to celebrate simchas coming forward. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.